Hello, welcome to the Institute of Crypto Anarchy. I am your host, Camille, and I am emotionally invested in Ethereum. You are my community. I love you. This is one of our OG game developers in this space. Please welcome Paul Gadi.
Thank you, Camille. All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. As Camille said, I'm a game developer, and I went into Ethereum, I guess, earlier than most game developers. Like back then, I don't know if you guys remember a game called CryptoKitties, which was kind of I guess it's one of the core moments when Web3 gaming started to happen. So back then, I was making games with some of the people with the CryptoKitties team, and we know some of the folks in the Sandbox team, and it was very different. Comparing what it was then to now. So I would say what I would want to discuss during my talk is a little bit of a story on that. I feel that as a game developer, there are things that I can share around how we should build the space, especially now that things are going to change again. I feel like AI is something that some of you may be keeping track of, but I think not enough of us are. And I think it's an opportunity for us now to do something more with games. And even though this is a topic for video games, I think this will be relevant to all of us because I feel like video games is just how I work on it as a medium, but games happens like in everything that we're building. So I'll talk about Gollem-class AIs. I think we need to explain what that is, but I'll just go through it as we do the talk. Okay, so I already talked a little bit about myself, but I think one thing that I want to start to tell everyone about is that game design is broken already, and I think AI will be the will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, rather. And it's a story that has been happening for quite a while, I would say. So what I will do is I'll talk a little bit about what it means to make meaningful games, talk about Gollem-class AIs, what they are, and then a little bit of call to action afterwards. What can we do as people building systems in the space to make more meaningful games in our products? All right, and so I mentioned Gollem-class AIs, and I think the best way to kind of know what that is to watch this talk by Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin. And I guess a broad overview of what Gollem-class AIs are is that they are generative large language models, and that's why it's Gollem, Gollem. And what Asa and Tristan says in their talk is that this is actually the second time that we're facing the Gollem-class AIs. The first one was during the time of social media. And what happened there was we lost. Like, it wasn't really a win-win situation when that AI encounter happened. And what happened was we kind of optimized towards the race to maximize engagement. And you see that in social networks. You see that with outrage being the main thing that social networks are optimized for. So they say that it started with the positive messages like give everyone a voice, connect with your friends, have SMBs reach their customers. But it was just the surface of it, and what was really happening was there was this algorithm that was maximizing engagement. And so we didn't really increase, I guess, the meaningfulness of transactions with AI, or with social networks rather, but we kind of just optimized for engagement. And I'm sorry, like it's not really readable, but as a game developer, I saw how that changed games as they were being made. So I've been making games for 20 years. The language around games has definitely changed because of social media and the optimization for engagement. Like before, I would say when people talked about games, it was about the narrative, the mechanics. Then I saw it change to become more marketing-like. Like it was about the funnel, the pyramid. It was about core loops, how they get people just going around the loop. Like the design is really optimized towards having them just go through the loop and you extract a resource from them afterwards. The language became daily active users, friends, for example, became a resource. Like you need to add your friends to be able to get a resource back. And, and the core mantra of a game developer during that time was that retention leads to monetization. The more they play your game, the higher the chances are that they'll pay. So that was kind of the main metric. That was everything we cared about, like how many people play the game and how long it takes for them to convert or to pay. And, and yeah, so you can kind of see what will happen if we optimize for that system towards AI when it comes during the next wave. But I want to take a little step back to 2012. So my talk is about how do we create more meaningful games in this world of Gollem-class AIs. And I would say, like, my journey into what a meaningful game has been largely influenced by a few talks, and this is one of them. Has anyone seen this talk by Brett Victor, Inventing on Principle? But if you haven't, I suggest you check it out. Like it gave me a glimpse of creating something that's I guess the talk itself says what the talk's all about. It's inventing on principle. It's as a technologist, we can do something bigger than what we are doing, or have a principle rather for what we are building. So yes, I won't spoil the talk, but Brett Victor starts with saying that he has a principle. It's finding a grounding principle for your work. It's something you believe is important and necessary and right. So it opened my mind around, even as just someone who is a technologist, you can find a deeper meaning into what you're building. And I guess fast forward to Web 2, I mentioned that the language was changing. Everyone was talking about funnels around friends being resources. And I wasn't the only one feeling that way. There were a lot of game developers who felt that this wasn't really the way that we should be making our games. And one good example for that is in 2019, a group of game developers gathered around a ranch in Texas, and they did this think tank called Project Horseshoe. And one good report that came out of that was the pro-social economics for game design. So I share this with all my Web3 friends. It gives a glimpse of how you can create better systems, because a lot of it also deals with tokenomics as well. Like, how do we create communities? How do we build systems where people are more win-win rather than more extractive? And there's a great quote that starts off this talk by Kurt Vonnegut, an American writer. He says, "What should young people do with their lives today? Many things, obviously, but the most daring thing is to create stable communities with which the terrible disease of loneliness can be cured." And I think that's what's nice around Web3 also. Like, my journey in Web3 is a bit also sideways, I would say. Like, I didn't want to go into Web3. I wanted to be a game developer. But then I started reaching out to these communities, so I felt we're doing the right things, like Gitcoin, doing open source. The platform cooperative folks who was analyzing the gig economies and seeing how we can do better. Meta governance, kernel, which I am part of. And I really like how Ethereum also settled on the messaging around infinite games. And as a game developer, that's a book that I read also, James Carr's book on finite and infinite games, where a finite game is played for the purpose of winning and an infinite game for the purpose of continuing the play. So that guides me. I would say that's part of how I find meaning in what I'm making. And I guess that's what I would engage everyone is, as you're building in this space, we're lucky that we are with a group of people who have that collective voice of solar punk, of decentralization, of crypto anarchism, and this is one show I would say that I suggest people watch if you haven't. It's called Arrival, and it's based on a book by Ted Chiang, and I really like how Ted Chiang sees his medium of science fiction. He says that science fiction is about using speculative scenarios as a lens to examine the human condition. And it's more meaningful, right? We're just not writing science fiction as a fantasy to explore, but he feels like there's something deeper there. And in my case, I feel that games, especially on Web3, can be playgrounds where communities can experiment and improve the human condition. So we've seen some very, very cool examples of that in Web3. Like the Constitution DAO, I feel, was very fun, right? You haven't seen something like that before in systems, in coordinating systems. So if we can do that more and explore more on what we can do as societies, I think games can really uplift, can be more meaningful. Yeah, so coming back to Gollem-class AI. So now we're going to face round 2 of our, not combat, I guess our interaction with AI. And now it's much more different, right? Like if you look at what AI can do nowadays, if you use ChatGPT, if you see what Stable Diffusion or Runway ML, all these generative tools can do, it's really scary. Like there's a reason why people are having some AI tumorism, right? Like people are afraid. And if you watch the talk by Tristan and Asa, one thing that they say is that the previous encounter with AI was the race to attention. And now it's going to be the race to intimacy. So if you've watched her, it's a perfect example of optimizing towards making meaningful, or rather making intimate connections between humans and machines. And I feel like there's a very, very clear parallel around coordination failure. So I guess for some of you, you may recognize the Moloch imagery. Like Moloch is I would say one of the villains in Web3, right? It's like the failure to coordination. And I see that there's going to be a lot of parallels. And the main thing is the race to intimacy, and the coordination failure is mostly grounded on our loss of human connection. Like it's the loss of trust with other humans. And this is a game that I also tell everyone to play. It's a game by Nicky Case around the evolution of trust. And I think it's a perfect game to talk about Web3 because, for one, it's a game. And number two, it really discusses coordination and how we can kind of see how coordination and trust can evolve in different kinds of spaces. All right, and so I'm going to be closing out my talk with, I guess, a few thought exercises on how we can create more meaningful games. But I just want to start with saying that, like, all of us are game developers, I feel, especially in Web3. We think of how to design the systems. We think of whether we're winning or we're losing. Like, all interactions can be game-like. And the first thing I say is, of course, to find your voice and your definition of meaning. So this is an exhibit around Rumi in Toronto, where I live. And I would say my journey into meaning is still kind of going on. And one thing I suggest people to do is, one, find their ikigai, which is find what is like the intersection of what you can do, what you're paid for, and what you love, and what you can share with other people. And that can be a source of meaning. And another is meaning via negativa, or find the meaning of something by finding what it's not. For example, meaning is different for all of us. Like as a person, what is meaningful to me may not be meaningful to you. But if you think of what is meaningless, right? Like maybe it's something that doesn't need to exist in this world, for example. Then you can kind of build on that to find your own meaning. The second exercise is to appreciate the technology of what we're building. A lot of the games that I see on Web3 are, I would say, meaningless. Like they're not really there's no reason for them to exist. But if you make something that's rooted in the technology, then that's something that's more meaningful. So this is a very great tweet by Alex Van de Sand around what is a great blockchain game, or what he wants from blockchain games. And yeah, I think just these 7 points already gives a good summary on what kind of game to make. And there's this group called the Autonomous Worlds group in Ethereum. So it's the OX Spark folks who are building games that are all on-chain. So that's something that you don't see in any other space. So I think do check them out as well. And then, so the last 2 points, this one is to focus on what you want your players to feel. I feel like games have kind of lost that initial, I would say, focus around having your players feel something. And we've seen that happen in recent days. Like there's this trend in games called cozy games, wherein gamers are more concerned with comfort versus competition. Because I don't know if you guys have played some of these games recently. A lot of them can be very toxic. Like you don't really want to spend time with these random people in the internet when they're just there to get something from you, right? So these cozy games, and I think there's also a cozy web movement that kind of focus on this feeling of comfort. I think that's a good way to kind of change our mindset around creating their games. Oops. And lastly is to unlearn what the game is, and to instead learn why humans play. And there's a great report by the Radar DAO, which is also from this QR code, discussing what play is. And this first screenshot on the left is Grand Theft Auto, and I put that there because there's this subset of people who are playing Grand Theft Auto, but they're not playing by the rules of the game. What they do is they just spend time in the space and they role play. For example, the people there, all of them are players, and they're acting out the scene of someone, I guess someone falling on the road, and they're all acting as policemen and as ambulance operators. So it's like improv. It's not like I'm here to earn money. I'm here to buy the next house in GTA. But they're there to play together and to spend time and act together in a space. So yeah. So unlearn what the game is and learn why humans play. Because I feel like as a game developer, sometimes I feel like it's a crutch. Like my language that I had going into the space kind of informs how I look at games. And what I do feel is, as I mentioned, games are everywhere. Like the protocols we're designing, the tokens we're designing are all games. What we can learn from game developers and how they built these systems are definitely applicable to what you're doing. And if you can find meaning in what you're building and find the true voice, I guess, that comes from what you want to make and what you want other people to feel, then you can create a meaningful game, and you can perhaps create the new next thing that would allow us to get us out of this rut in crypto, right? And make something that people really want to play with, to experience. And yeah, and I guess I have time for questions, but that's our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Camille.
Thank you, Paul. I think it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
And I actually don't see many people who do GTA roleplay as part of their presentation, because I think that's kind of like under the radar for like many people.
Yeah.
Even though like I also built one server just to like, really test out like how players behave in like certain environments. And those players actually shout at you if you like fall out of your role. Like if you're a police officer,
funny.
yeah, they do. And we did like a robbery with my friends, like not an actual, like a GTR pace. So, but yeah, so and it was just like we had like the police like surrounding the building, and it was just like a crazy experience. And that's when I actually think about when you speak about meaningful games. My question here is, what do you consider was your favorite, or like your most meaningful game? What was the most meaningful game for you in your experience, in your life? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard question. One game that I think of also is by this game designer. Well, maybe two. Can I mention two? The first, the first one is it's a very recent game. I suggest if you like card games, or even if you don't, it's a game called Inscription. Inscription with a Y, made by Dan Muller, I think. But yeah, but it's very meta. I don't want to spoil what it is, but when I played it, I was like, oh, so this is something that games can be. The second one is a game called Passage by Jason Rohrer. So it's a very lo-fi game, but I played it when I was pretty young. And the message there is around the passage of time and what time means to someone. So when I played that game, I was like, oh, so it kind of, I don't know, it made me feel things. I think so. As I said, but I think games that are meaningful are the ones where the players feel something afterwards, or are focused on making people feel that. So yeah. So Passage by Jason Rohrer and Inscription. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
I have a question regarding, do you actually feel that the narrative of Web3 gaming economy is actually ruining games? Because it actually feels that they're actually pushing the narrative of economy first, and that's actually ruining the engagement and fun aspect.
Yes, yeah. I do. But of course, I'm open to being wrong. I feel like there are a lot of smart people who are trying to find the connection with Web3, the narrative, and games, right? But I'm more old school. I feel like, yeah, one thing about finance is it kind of also dehumanizes things a little bit, right? So if it's more about transactions rather than talking to humans, then the narrative weakens a little bit, I feel. So so yes, but I'm still open to changing my mind. I feel like we need games to focus more on the non-financial aspect, and maybe a story is the CryptoKitties game, right? That it wasn't really designed to be monetized. It was like a breathing game that you can share with people, and that became bigger than what it was. It became the standard for NFTs. So maybe we can be more playful, start with something like that, and then be mindful of what happened with NFTs and just build something new, right? So. Yeah.
Meow. Thank
right.
you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.